The scream tore through the canyon before Chaska could even dismount. He kicked his paint horse forward, rifle already in hand, eyes scanning the ravine where the overturned wagon lay, smoking one wheel spinning lazily in the air. A woman's voice, raw, desperate, cut through the August heat. "Help someone, please." Chaska didn't hesitate. He slid from his horse moccasins, finding purchase on the loose shale as he scrambled down. Rocks clattered ahead of him into the wreckage below. The Dakota Badlands shimmered in the merciless sun, and the air thick and wavering. When he reached the wagon, he saw her, a white woman pinned beneath a broken axle calico dress, torn and dusty face streaked with blood from a gash above her eyebrow. Her eyes blue as winter ice locked onto him with terror and desperate hope. "Please," she gasped. "My leg, I can't move." Chaska dropped beside her, assessing quickly. The axle had her left leg trapped, but not crushed. He placed one steady hand on her shoulder. "Be still," he said in careful English. "I get you out?" He wedged his shoulder under the axle muscles, straining as he lifted. The woman bit back a cry as pressure eased. With his free hand, Chaska pulled her leg free, then lowered the axle with controlled effort. She lay gasping, clutching her leg. Chaska's hands moved over the limb, checking for breaks. Bruised, swelling, but intact. "Can stand?" he asked. I think so." He helped her up, supporting her weight as she tested the leg. She winced, but nodded. Then her eyes widened, looking past him. The smoke. A small fire had started near the cargo bed, fed by spilled oil. Chaska moved quickly, smothering flames with his blanket before they could spread. When he turned back, the woman had collapsed against a boulder face, pale with shock. Chaska brought his water skin. She drank gratefully, color returning to her cheeks. As he tended the cut on her forehead with a cloth strip, their eyes met. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm Eliza Thornton." "Chaska." He didn't offer more. "Were you following me?" "No, I hunt." He gestured to the deer carcass tied to his saddle above. "I hear you call." She studied his face, trying to decide if he was dangerous. He knew. He was used to that look. 26 years old, lean and strong, black hair past his shoulders, eyes that had seen too much death. He wore buckskin pants and a faded blue cotton shirt, and around his shoulders hung an elk-hide cloak, worn smooth with age, decorated with intricate beadwork. His sister's beadwork. The thought brought its familiar ache. He pushed it away. "You travel alone?" he asked. "I was with a supply train from Fort Laramie. Bandits attacked 2 days ago. I escaped with this wagon, but..." She gestured at the wreckage. "The road gave way." Chaska looked up at the crumbling cliff edge. Not an accident, someone had weakened the road deliberately. He could see tool marks in the stone, recent enough that dust still clung to the cuts. "You were followed," he said. "Road was cut. Trap." Her face went white. "What? They think you have something. But I don't just teaching supplies for Silver Creek. Books, slates. What you take when you run." She hesitated, then pulled out a small leather pouch. "Only this. From the supply master's saddlebag. I thought it might be important." Chaska untied it and shook out a folded yellowed paper. He opened it carefully. The English writing was difficult, but he recognized some words. Agreement. Land rights. Pritchard. That last name made his jaw tighten. Silas Pritchard. The man who had sold Chaska's mother the blankets that killed her. 5 years ago, during the harsh winter, Pritchard had come with trade goods. Chaska's mother traded their best furs for 3 wool blankets. Within a week, she fell ill with a strange sickness, fever, rash, delirium. She died screaming, skin covered in pustules. 2 other families who bought Pritchard's blankets died the same way. Only later did a drunken trapper tell the truth the blankets came from an eastern smallpox hospital. Pritchard had known. He'd bought them cheap and sold them at premium prices to the tribes. When confronted, he'd paid off authorities. No one was prosecuted. Chaska's sister Mika had watched their mother die. The grief broke something in her. She'd always been gentle, quick to laugh, skilled at beadwork and storytelling. After their mother's death, she became silent, withdrawn. She'd made Chaska this cloak, pouring all her remaining love into the beadwork symbols of protection, family home. 3 months later, she walked into the river and didn't come back. They found her body downstream, her face peaceful for the first time since their mother's death. Chaska wore the cloak every day. It was all he had left of the sister who had once braided his hair and told him stories. The weight on his shoulders was both comfort and penance. He should have seen her pain, should have saved her. But he'd been too consumed with his own rage at Pritchard, too busy planning a revenge that never came to notice the person right in front of him, drowning in grief. "This paper," he said, voice rough with old anger, "is about Pritchard. Says he tricked people, forged documents for land." Eliza leaned forward, reading. "It's a confession, signed by Marcus Dalton. He witnessed Pritchard falsifying deeds, bribing surveyors, forcing families off their land." She looked up. This could destroy him. If it reached a judge. It not reach judge. Pritchard owns judges, owns everyone. "Then what do we do?" Chaska studied her face. "We go Fort Sterling. 2 days walk. Colonel Mackenzie there, he is fair man. He not like Pritchard. Will you help me? Pritchard killed my mother, my sister." He met her eyes. "If this paper hurt him, then yes, I help." The crack of a rifle shattered the moment. The bullet smashed into the rock above their heads, spraying chips. Chaska grabbed the woman and yanked her behind the boulder as a second shot rang out. "Not move," he hissed. 3 riders appeared on the west ridge, silhouetted against the sun. A voice boomed across the canyon. "Hand over the woman and the document. Do that, we ride on peaceful." Chaska didn't waste breath answering. He kicked dirt over his fire, plunging them into darkness, then grabbed his rifle and Eliza's wrist. "Run. Follow water, not stop." They ran. 2 miles north in a narrow canyon, they finally stopped. Eliza collapsed against rock, sliding down to sit in dirt. Chaska checked her, quickly scratches, blisters, but nothing critical. He bandaged a bullet graze on her forearm with a strip torn from his shirt. "You speak English well," she said between gasps. "Some. Traders teach me, missionaries." His expression darkened. "Soldiers." She nodded slowly. "Those men, who are they?" "Men who work for Pritchard. They want this paper." He carefully refolded it. "We rest short time. They come at dawn." As darkness fell, they salvaged what they could, a canteen, dried beef, a wool blanket. Chaska shared his provisions. After a while, Eliza spoke quietly. "Why are you helping me, your people and mine? We're not friends." Chaska was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. "My sister. She was punished by soldiers for taking food to feed starving children. They whip her. They whip me when I try to stop them." He touched his scarred shoulder. "I make promise then. No one starve. No one die alone while I can help. I'm sorry for what happened." He shrugged, jaw tight. "I also have nephew. Young. Brave but not wise. He want to go on raid against settlers. I say no is suicide. He call me coward, say I forget our ways." His hands clenched into fists. "He go with other young men. Soldiers catch them at dawn. My nephew not come back. They hang him from tree with others leave them for birds. Eliza's hand moved to cover his. You blame yourself. I should be there. Should protect him. Or maybe... His voice broke. Maybe if I go, he not go. He tried to prove himself because I stay behind. Or you'd both be dead, she said gently. And you wouldn't be here to save me. He looked at her sharply, surprised by the understanding in her words. Most whites would have said his nephew got what he deserved. But this woman offered compassion instead of judgment. Something in his chest shifted, a wall beginning to crack. We rest now, he said roughly. Dawn comes soon. They walked through country that grew more rugged with each mile. By late afternoon of the second day, they reached Knife Spur, a wind-swept saddle between towering cliffs. Chaska moved cautiously, eyes constantly scanning. Halfway across, he froze. A rattlesnake coiled on a flat rock ahead, tail vibrating warning. The crack of a rifle split the air. The bullet struck rock, sending shards flying. The snake vanished, and Chaska grabbed Eliza, tumbling down a slope of loose shale. Her thigh scraped jagged rock, tearing through fabric and skin. She cried out, blood welling between her fingers. Chaska pulled her behind a boulder, examining the wound. Deep bleeding freely, but not arterial. He tore a strip from his shirt and pressed it against the gash. Hold still. It hurts. She gasped, her face going pale. I know. But you be good. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he tied the bandage, then crushed yarrow leaves into paste and applied them. Stop blood. Stop sick. His hand lingered on her leg. When he looked up, their eyes met hers, wide with pain, and something else as dark and filled with concern beyond practical necessity. You be strong, he said quietly. I not let you die here. Above, voices called out. 3 riders picking down the slope. Chaska counted calculated odds. We fight or we die, he said. Eliza's hand found the small knife at her belt. Despite her fear, her voice was steady. Then we fight. He positioned her behind the boulders, showed her how to hold his rifle. Their shoulders pressed together as he guided her hands, and she became acutely aware of his warmth, the solid strength of him, the way his breath stirred her hair. Now, he whispered. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard, the shot going wide, but the noise startled the nearest horse. Chaska loosed an arrow, striking a rider's hat brim. In the confusion, he grabbed her hand, and they ran, bullets whining behind them. They reached a dry creek bed, lined with cottonwoods. In the hollow of a fallen tree, Chaska made her hide, while he circled back, laying false trails with the skills learned from childhood. When he returned at sunset, he said, They lose us. For now. But that man, Marshall Hart, he is good hunter. He find us again if we not careful. How do you know his name? He call it out. Want me know who hunt me. His pride thing. He want me be afraid. That night, shivering despite lingering heat, Eliza spoke softly. I wasn't always a teacher. In France, my family lost everything. Revolution, they called it, but it was just people hurting each other. My parents sent me to an aunt in Paris, but she was cruel. Wanted me to marry an old man, 60 years old, for his money and connections. She paused, her voice dropping. He tried to force himself on me one night. I fought him off and ran. Worked in kitchens, laundries, sang in cafes for coins. When I heard about America, I saved every centime for 3 years. You be brave, Chaska said, or foolish. She laughed without humor. I thought America would be different. Thought I could start fresh, be someone new. But everywhere I go, there are men like Pritchard, men who think they can take what they want. Not all men are like this. No, she agreed, looking at him. Not all. They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts, but the air between them felt different somehow, charged with a connection neither had expected to find. They reached the river at midday. The water was choked with debris, shattered furniture, broken tools, a child's slate. A voice called from upstream, "Identify yourselves." Chaska's hand moved to his knife, but didn't draw. "Chaska, Lakota, I have woman from supply train." A man emerged, older, maybe 45, wearing a dusty coat. "Dr. Josiah Whitlow." His eyes widened. "Miss Thornton, thank God we thought you drowned." More figures appeared, survivors, maybe a dozen. Among them, Eliza recognized Ruth Hargreave, the stern schoolteacher from a neighboring town, and a young man named Owen Collins, his leg-bandaged face pale with pain. "Not everyone," Ruth said quietly as they approached, "but more than we feared." Collins limped forward on his crutch, favoring his right leg heavily. "Miss Thornton, about the attack, I was near the supply wagons when it happened. I heard explosions before the bandits came. Dynamite. 3 charges timed close together." His jaw clenched. It wasn't random. Someone orchestrated it. "Careful with such accusations, Mr. Collins," Ruth said sharply. "Words like that can get you killed." "I know what I heard," Collins insisted. Something in his tone struck Chaska as odd. Too rehearsed, too emphatic. And there was something else. Collins kept touching a silver pocket watch that hung from his vest, expensive looking with initials engraved on it. Too fine for a young deputy's salary. The initials Chaska noticed when Collins turned were S.P. Dr. Whitlow spoke heavily. "If Collins is right, the only one who profits from destroying that supply train is Silas Pritchard. Half the claims in the territory belong to him. That train carried documents that could have challenged his land titles." Chaska glanced at Eliza at the document in her pocket. Before he could speak, Ruth said, "We need to cross the river. There's a ferry cable downstream. We can reach safety by nightfall if we move now." "Men hunt us," Chaska said. "They follow close. Then we move fast," Ruth replied, her voice brooking no argument. The ferry cable hung slack across brown water, the platform long gone. Dr. Whitlow went first, moving slowly but steadily across, hand over hand. Ruth followed, then others one by one. A shout echoed from the ridge. Riders appeared, 4 of them silhouetted against the sky. Marshal Hart and his men. "Go!" Chaska pushed Eliza toward the cable. "Now." She grabbed the rough metal hands, slick with sweat. The cable bit into her palms as she pulled herself onto it, legs dangling over the swift water. Hand over hand. Don't look down. Don't think about the current. A rifle cracked. The bullet hissed past, striking water. Eliza's breath caught, but she kept moving. Then the cable shifted, and Chaska was behind her, his chest pressed against her back, his arms reaching past hers, his body shielding her from the shooters. "One hand at a time," he murmured close to her ear. "I have you, not let you fall." They moved together, breathing synchronized. Another shot rang out, and she felt him flinch, heard his sharp intake of breath, but he didn't let go. His warmth against her back, his steady presence, gave her courage. Inch by inch, they crossed until her feet touched solid ground, and Dr. Whitlow pulled her onto the bank. Chaska dropped beside her, blood streaming from a graze across his ribs. Eliza's hands flew to the wound. "You're hurt. I live." He caught her wrist grip firm despite pain. "You keep move. That is what matter." Their eyes held something passing between them, something neither was ready to name, but both felt burning in their chests. One of Hart's men started across the cable after them. Chaska raised his rifle and fired not at the man, but at the anchor post on the far side. Wood splintered. The cable lurched. The man screamed and fell, his body swallowed by the brown water. Hart stood on the far bank, face twisted with rage. "This isn't over, Indian, you hear me? I'll find you. I'll find all of you." But for now, the river was between them. They ran. Silver Creek was a handful of buildings clustered around one dusty street. The sheriff's office was adobe and iron, and Sheriff Brand was a thick-necked man with cold eyes who listened to Dr. Whitlow's story with a face that gave nothing away. "The woman stays here," Brand said flatly when the doctor finished. "For her protection." "I don't need," Eliza started. "It's not a request, miss." Chaska stepped forward, hand on his knife. "She do nothing wrong." Brand's eyes flicked to him with barely concealed contempt. "And you're trespassing, Indian. Move along before I find a reason to lock you up too." Dr. Whitlow put a restraining hand on Chaska's arm. "Let me handle this. Starting a fight won't help." Chaska hesitated, every instinct screaming to fight, but he saw the logic. Attacking a sheriff would only make things worse. He nodded slowly, but as the deputy led Eliza toward the cell, she looked back, her eyes finding his. Chaska took off his elk-hide cloak and handed it to the deputy. "For her. Night is cold." The deputy shrugged and tossed it through the cell window. Eliza caught it, brought it to her face, breathing in the scent of sage and smoke, and something uniquely Chaska. Then she reached through the bars, her fingers curling around the iron. "Don't leave," she whispered. Chaska stepped close, his hand covering hers. His skin was warm, calloused, steady. "I not leave. I promise you this." Night fell. Chaska sat in shadow across from the jail, waiting and watching. Owen Collins found him there, moving awkwardly on his crutch. "What's the plan?" Collins asked, settling beside him with a grunt of pain. "Get her out. Tonight. You trust me to help." Chaska studied him in the darkness. The young man had been helpful, had shared information about the explosions. But something in his eagerness, the way his eyes had tracked the document bulge in Eliza's pocket, made Chaska uneasy. And there was that expensive pocket watch again, gleaming in the moonlight. Too fine. Too new. The initials SP catching the light. "Why you want help?" Chaska asked bluntly. Collins looked away. "Because Pritchard needs to pay for what he did. Because it's right. Because..." He paused. "Because I've seen too many good people destroyed by corrupt men. I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem." Not the whole truth, Chaska sensed. But for now, he needed allies. "You helped me get Key," Chaska said. "That is all." They waited until the town slept. Then Chaska showed Collins the loose boards beneath the jail that led to the crawl space. They wormed inside, moving carefully through dirt and darkness. Above them, voices filtered through the floorboards. Sheriff Brand's voice, low and satisfied. "Open it." The sound of metal scraping. Then Brand again. "No deed, just a ledger." Another voice, Marshal Gideon Hart. A ledger, names, ore weights, dates, all signed by Pritchard. A pause as pages turned. Good God, this is proof of falsified records going back years. Bribes paid to surveyors, judges, even the territorial governor. And here, a list of people who asked too many questions, all marked as resolved. Look at the dates. They line up with mining accidents, drownings, unexplained disappearances. Silence for a moment. Then Hart's voice, harder, and orders. Right here, orders to sabotage the supply train. Dated 3 days before the attack. He wanted to destroy any evidence that might have been in those wagons. Signed in his own hand. Ruth Hargreaves' voice shaking but firm. I took that ledger from his office 4 days before the attack. I was delivering laundry, that's how I supported myself, taking in washing from the wealthy homes. I saw him writing in it, saw him lock it in his desk. Something about the way he did it, the satisfaction on his face. Her voice broke. I knew he was planning something terrible. That night I picked the lock, took the ledger, and hid it in the supply master's saddlebag. I thought if anything happened, someone honest might find it. Those people on that train deserved justice. Justice. Brand laughed coldly, cruelly. There's no justice here, Mrs. Hargreave. Only money. Pritchard will pay a fortune to bury this evidence, and he'll pay just as much to bury anyone who's seen it. What are you saying? Ruth's voice was quiet, but Chaska could hear the fear creeping in. I'm saying witnesses need to be eliminated. All of them. Starting with the woman in that cell and anyone who's helped her. In the crawl space, Chaska felt movement beside him. Collins was shifting, and then the scrape of a match being struck. Chaska's hand shot out, grabbing Collins' wrist in a grip like iron. In the faint glow of the match, he saw guilt on the young man's face, and something else. Cold calculation. Dead eyes that belonged to someone far older than his years. I'm sorry, Collins whispered, but his tone was flat emotionless. I need that ledger. My father needs it. The words hit Chaska like a physical blow. Your father? Silas Pritchard. Collins's voice was completely devoid of feeling now, the mask dropping away. He sent me to infiltrate the survivors, gain your trust, and retrieve the evidence at any cost. The leg injury faked. I've been reporting your movements to Hart since the river crossing. Every step you've taken, every word you've spoken, he knows all of it. You betray us. Betray people who trust you. I'm protecting my family. Collins pulled his wrist free with surprising strength. Something you failed to do, from what I hear. Your sister, your nephew, you let them die. At least I'm fighting for mine. The cruelty of the words, and the casual way Collins weaponized Chaska's deepest pain, took Chaska's breath away for a moment. Then rage, white-hot and pure, flooded through him. But before he could move, Collins called out, "Brand there under the floor, the Indian, and whoever's with him." Chaska didn't wait. He came up through the loose boards into the jail office itself, his knife already in his hand. The guard turned, reaching for his gun. Chaska struck a precise blow to the temple that dropped the man instantly without killing him. He grabbed the keys from the fallen guard's belt and ran to the cell. Eliza's face appeared at the bars, her eyes wide. Collins betrayed us, Chaska said quickly, his fingers fumbling with the keys. He is Pritchard's son. We must go now. Understanding and shock flashed across her face. The watch, the initials. Yes, should have seen. Was fool. The lock clicked open. Come, quick. They burst out the back door into the alley. Ruth was waiting there. She'd slipped away during the confusion inside. I heard everything. Ruth said, her face pale but determined. I'm coming with you. I brought you into this nightmare. I'll see it through to the end. Shouts erupted from inside the jail. They ran into the night, but this time the pursuit was organized, coordinated. Hart knew where they were going. Collins had told him everything, every plan, every destination, every weakness. They fled across open prairie under a moon that was too bright, too revealing. Before they could reach the hills where they might find cover, riders appeared from multiple directions, surrounding them in a tightening noose. 6 men, rifles leveled and ready. Marshal Gideon Hart sat his horse at the center, a predator's smile splitting his weathered face. Beside him, Owen Collins sat his own horse, no crutch, no limp, no trace of injury. The wounded deputy had been nothing but theater, a role played to perfection. End of the line. Hart said, his voice carrying satisfaction and something darker. "You've led us on quite a chase, Indian. But every hunt ends the same way." But Chaska had been thinking, watching, planning. He'd noticed storm clouds building on the western horizon, smelled rain in the air, felt the electricity that made his skin prickle and the hair on his arms stand up. He'd hunted in storms before. He knew what they could do. "You want me?" Chaska said, stepping forward away from the women, drawing Hart's attention. "I am the one who killed your man at River. I am the one who make you look foolish, make you chase across territory like dog after rabbit. Let women go. Take me." Hart laughed, the sound ugly in the still air. "Nice try, savage. But I want the ledger, and she has it. Besides, dead witnesses can't testify. All three of you are loose ends that need cutting." "No," Chaska said. "I have it." And he pulled folded papers from his shirt, not the real ledger, but pages from Dr. Whitlow's medical journal that looked official enough in the dim moonlight. Hart's eyes narrowed with greed. He dismounted slowly, confidently, his hand resting on his gun. "Give it here, nice and slow." "Come take," Chaska said, his voice deadly calm. Hart walked forward, and he was 3 steps away when the storm broke. Lightning cracked across the sky with a sound like the world splitting open, striking a dead tree 50 yards away. The thunder was immediate, deafening. Horses screamed in primal terror and bolted. Men cursed, fighting desperately for control of panicked animals. Chaska moved. He grabbed Hart, spinning the bigger man around to use as a shield, and his knife found Hart's belt, slicing through leather, so gun and ammunition belt fell uselessly to the ground. Then he shoved Hart backward into his confused men and ran, grabbing Eliza's hand and pulling her and Ruth toward the rocks. Bullets whined past them, but the storm was intensifying with frightening speed. Rain coming in sheets, now cold and hard, lightning turning the world white and black in flickering succession. Thunder drowned out the gunfire, made communication impossible. They reached a ravine and slid down into it, the storm raging above them like the anger of ancient gods. Water was already beginning to flow along the bottom, a flash flood forming with terrifying speed. "We must go higher," Ruth shouted over the thunder, her voice barely audible. They climbed the ravine wall, finding handholds in the dark, soaked to the skin and gasping for breath. Behind them, they heard Hart's men following. But the storm was making everyone blind, turning the world into chaos. They reached a narrow shelf of rock and pressed themselves against the stone as the water below became a torrent, a roaring river of mud and debris. One of Hart's men, too slow to climb or too disoriented to find the path, was swept away, his scream swallowed by thunder before it could fully form. The storm raged for an hour that felt like eternity. When it finally began to pass, the landscape had changed dramatically. The ravine was now a rushing river, and Hart and his remaining men were trapped on the far side, unable to cross the violent water. But Chaska knew it was temporary. Hart would find another way. Men like that always did. "We keep moving," he said, his voice hoarse. "Fort Sterling. Still 2 days, maybe less if we push hard." They walked through country that had turned to sucking mud, slipping and struggling. Chaska's wounded shoulder throbbed with every step. And he could see Eliza limping on her injured leg, her face tight with pain she refused to voice. On the second day, they came to a small settlement called Redemption, a dozen shacks clinging to a hillside like barnacles inhabited by men with hollow eyes and broken dreams. The settlement's leader was a man who called himself Reverend Stone, though Chaska doubted he'd ever seen the inside of a real church. Stone was in his 60s, face weathered like old leather eyes, shrewd and calculating. "We need supplies," Dr. Whitlow said, stepping forward as their spokesman. "Food, water, medicine. We can pay." Stone's eyes moved over them, slowly lingering on Eliza in a way that made Chaska's hand move to his knife. Woman traveling with an Indian and claiming to have money, that's an interesting story. You're running from something. Or someone. Our business is our own, Ruth said sharply. Everything is my business in redemption, Stone replied. But you're welcome to stay. Of course, everything has a price, and prices vary. They had no choice. They bought supplies with the little money the survivors had pooled together, but Stone made it clear he wasn't satisfied with mere coin. That night, as Eliza was fetching water from the communal well, Stone approached her. The settlement was dark, most of the miners already in their shacks sleeping off exhaustion and cheap whiskey. You're a pretty thing, Stone said, his voice oily. French, are you? We don't get many refined ladies here. Most women in these parts are. He paused meaningfully. Well, let's say they're here for very specific business purposes. His hand reached out to touch her hair. Chaska's knife was at Stone's throat before the man's fingers could make contact, the blade pressing just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. You not touch her? Chaska said, his voice deadly quiet. Stone raised his hand slowly, but he was smiling, showing brown teeth. Possessive, is he? That's sweet. But you're in my camp, Indian. My rules, my territory. Then we leave. In the morning, Stone said, dabbing at the blood on his throat. After you've paid for the supplies you've already consumed? Double price, I think. Seems fair given the inconvenience. It was blatant extortion, and they all knew it. But they were exhausted, injured, and Hart was still hunting them somewhere out in the darkness. They agreed to work through the night to pay Stone's inflated price, Chaska hunting despite his injury. Eliza cooking for the miners, Ruth tending to the settlement's sick with what little medicine they had. During those long, exhausting hours, a grizzled old miner named Caleb approached Eliza quietly while she was stirring a pot of stew over the fire. His face was ravaged by hard living, but his eyes were kind. You're running from something bad, he said without preamble. I know the look. Seen it in the mirror often enough. Eliza hesitated, then nodded slowly. I won't ask what, Caleb said. But I will tell you this Stone has a telegraph connection to other camps and towns. He sells information to whoever pays, bounty hunters, marshals, criminals. Doesn't matter to him. If someone's hunting you with money to spend, he'll sell your location before dawn breaks. Eliza's blood ran cold. What should we do? Leave before first light. I'll make sure the dogs stay quiet. There's a path east less traveled. It'll add time to your journey, but you'll avoid the main roads. Caleb pulled a small bundle from his coat, dried venison and hardtack. Take this. Not much, but it's all I can spare. Why help us? Eliza asked, her voice catching. You don't even know us. Caleb smiled sadly, his eyes distant. Because I had a daughter once. She would have been about your age now. Beautiful, smart kind. She married a prospector, moved to California. Got caught in a flood 5 years back. He paused, composing himself. I couldn't save her. But maybe I can save you. Sometimes doing the right thing is all we have left to make the pain mean something. True to his word, Caleb helped them slip away before dawn, even giving them extra provisions he clearly couldn't afford to spare. As they disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, Eliza looked back and saw the old miner standing in the doorway of his shack, watching them go with an expression of mingled hope and sorrow. There are good people, she said quietly to Chaska as they walked. Even in places like this, even after everything. Some, Chaska agreed. Not many, but enough. Must remember the good ones, not let the bad ones make us forget. They reached Fort Sterling territory on the 5th day, exhausted and half-starved, despite Caleb's gift. The fort was visible in the valley below, a sprawling log palisade with watchtowers and the American flag snapping in the wind. Safety, justice, hope. But as they descended the final slope, Chaska spotted riders moving to intercept them. 6 men, heart at their head, spurring horses to a gallop. And with them rode Collins, rifle in hand, his face set with grim determination. "Run!" Chaska shouted. They ran stumbling and sliding down the loose scree. The fort was half a mile away. The riders were much closer and gaining fast. Gunfire erupted, the sound sharp and vicious. Chaska felt something punch his left shoulder, white-hot pain that spun him half around. His vision blurred, but he kept his feet moving, his right hand clamping over the wound. Blood, hot and wet, seeped between his fingers, ran down his arm. "Chaska!" Eliza's scream was anguished, filled with raw terror. "Keep going." He pushed her ahead of him with his good arm, using his body as a shield, knowing he was leaving a blood trail but unable to stop. "Don't stop. Whatever happened, you run," but they weren't going to make it. The riders were too close, the fort too far. Chaska's vision was swimming, his legs growing weak. They needed cover, needed somewhere to make a stand. Then he saw it to their left, partially hidden by scrub brush, and a tumble of rocks, the entrance to an old mine shaft. Half collapsed, probably dangerous, but their only chance. There. He grabbed Eliza and Ruth, pulling them toward the dark opening in the hillside. They plunged into darkness just as bullets whined off the rock face behind them, striking stone and sending chips flying. The tunnel was narrow, claustrophobic, the ceiling low enough that they had to duck. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of old dynamite and older fears. They stumbled deeper into the mine, Chaska's bloody hand leaving prints on the rough wall, marking their passage. Behind them, they heard horses pulling up and then footsteps entering the mine entrance. They can't go far. Hart's voice echoed through the tunnels, distorted and multiplied. "It's a dead end, Collins. You and Burke take the left fork when we reach it. The rest with me. We'll flush them out like the rats they are." Chaska, Eliza, and Ruth pressed deeper into the mine's oppressive darkness, hands outstretched to feel their way. The tunnel branched and twisted, descended at sharp angles. Old support beams groaned ominously overhead, rotted and unstable. This place could collapse at any moment, bringing tons of rock down on all of them. They reached a junction where 3 tunnels met in a small chamber. Old mining equipment lay scattered about like the bones of some industrial beast, rusty pickaxes with broken handles, coils of rope gone brittle with age, broken lanterns that would never light again. And in the corner, half buried under rubble, something that made Chaska's heart race, a box of mining explosives, old and water-stained, but possibly still viable. "Can you use those?" Eliza whispered, seeing where his eyes had gone. "Maybe. If not too old, not too wet." He knelt beside the box with his good arm, his wounded shoulders screaming in protest. He forced himself to focus past the pain. "You know how light fire makes spark." "Yes, I can do that." "Good." His mind was racing, forming a desperate plan, born of necessity and the certain knowledge that they couldn't win a straight fight. "We make trap, bring roof down on them. But we must be in right position in tunnel that leads away. You understand?" Ruth spoke up, her voice steady despite the fear. "I'll help. Tell me what to do. I'm not useless." They worked quickly in the near darkness, Chaska's hands moving by feel and memory of similar setups he'd seen in his travels. They placed charges at key support beams, the ones that looked like they were bearing the most weight. Then they trailed rope fuses back through one of the tunnels, the one that seemed to lead deepest into the mine, the one that might have another exit if they were extraordinarily lucky. "When I say you light fuse," Chaska told Eliza, pressing the matches into her hand. Then we run, very, very fast. Do not look back. Do not hesitate. You understand? I understand, she said, and her hand was steady when she took the matches. No trembling, no hesitation. Footsteps echoed closer, along with the sound of men arguing about directions. Hart's voice. I can smell your blood, Indian. You're leaving a trail a blind man could follow. It ends here. Chaska looked at Eliza in the faint light filtering from somewhere above. Her face was streaked with dirt and fear, but her eyes were fierce, burning with determination, and something else, something that made his breath catch. Eliza, he said quietly, urgently, if this not work. Don't. She interrupted her hand, finding his face in the darkness, her palm warm against his cheek. Don't say it. We're getting out of here. We stand firm, you and me. We've faced too much, come too far to fall now. Do you hear me? We're walking out of here together. He nodded, something warm and painful and powerful expanding in his chest until he thought it might burst. Then we go. Together. They moved into the deep tunnel, laying the final trail of fuse. Hart's men were in the main chamber now, their voices loud and confident, arguing about which tunnel to follow. Then Colin's voice, sharp and clear. This way, fresh blood on the wall. They went this way. Now, Chaska hissed. Eliza struck the match, her hands amazingly, impossibly steady, and touched it to the fuse. The rope began to hiss and spark, the flame crawling along its length like a bright orange snake. They ran. The tunnel was treacherous, full of obstacles they couldn't see in the darkness, fallen beams, scattered tools, places where the floor dropped away unexpectedly. Ruth stumbled over something and went down hard. Eliza caught her arm, hauled her up, kept her moving. Chaska led them by feel and instinct, one hand on the wall, his wounded shoulder banging against stone, sending fresh waves of agony through his body. But he didn't stop, couldn't stop. Behind them, they heard Hart's men enter the tunnel, heard Collins shout a warning as he spotted the sparking fuse. The explosion was enormous, apocalyptic. The entire mine shook like something alive and dying. The tunnel filled with choking dust and acrid smoke that seared their lungs. Massive support beams cracked with sounds like rifle shots, like the bones of giants breaking. Rock rained from the ceiling in chunks and boulders. The blast wave picked them up and threw them forward like children's toys, and they hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from their lungs. For a terrible, eternal moment, Chaska thought they'd miscalculated, that the whole mine was coming down on them too, that they'd survived Hart only to be buried alive in the dark. The ground bucked and heaved beneath them. More explosions followed as other old charges, disturbed by the first blast, went off in sympathetic detonation. But then, gradually, the shaking subsided. The collapse stayed behind them, tons of rock and timber sealing off the way they'd come, like a stone door slamming shut forever. Sealing off Hart and his men on the other side. They lay gasping in the darkness, ears ringing so loudly they couldn't hear each other's voices. Gradually, over long minutes, Chaska became aware of sounds from beyond the collapse, muffled shouting, someone screaming in pain or terror, or both, the grinding groan of shifting rock settling into new configurations. Then, horribly, the screaming stopped. We have to keep moving, Ruth said, her voice coming from somewhere to his left, barely audible through the ringing in his ears. That collapse might have weakened the whole structure. This place could still come down on us. She was right. Already Chaska could hear ominous creaking from the tunnel roof above them, could feel small pieces of debris raining down like deadly rain. They pushed forward, feeling their way through pitch darkness, moving by touch alone. Chaska's wounded shoulder had gone numb, which he knew was a bad sign. He was losing too much blood. But then, blessedly, miraculously, they saw light ahead. Not sunlight, but the gray light of early dawn filtering through a crack in the hillside. A secondary entrance probably used for ventilation or as an emergency exit decades ago. They emerged from the earth like souls returning from the underworld, blinking in sudden light that seemed blinding after the darkness. Behind them, they heard a deep, final rumbling. As more of the mind collapsed internally, the old workings finally giving up their long fight against gravity and time. Did we? Eliza couldn't finish the question, couldn't quite bring herself to ask if they'd killed the men pursuing them. I not know, Chaska said, his voice hoarse and distant even to his own ears. But if they live, they trapped deep. Take long time to dig out. Maybe too long. They staggered down the hillside toward the fort, three figures covered in dust and blood, moving like the walking wounded from some great battle. Soldiers were already running toward them, having heard the massive explosion. Chaska made it halfway down before his legs simply gave out. He hit the ground hard, the world spinning, tilting, fading. He was vaguely aware of Eliza screaming for help, her voice raw and desperate. Strong hands lifted him, carried him. Voices speaking English too fast for him to follow. The sensation of movement, of being borne through gates and into shelter. Then darkness swallowed him whole, and for a while there was nothing at all. He woke slowly, consciousness returning in fragments and pieces. White walls, the sharp, clean smell of carbolic acid. Sunlight slanting through a high window, dust motes dancing in the beam like tiny spirits. A fort infirmary. Safe. His shoulder was wrapped in clean bandages, the pain reduced to a dull throb instead of the earlier white-hot agony. Someone had cleaned him, tended his wounds with skill and care. He was alive. Eliza sat in a chair beside his bed, her head resting on her folded arms on the mattress. She was asleep, her face peaceful despite exhaustion, despite the bandage on her forehead and the dirt still smudging her cheeks. Even covered in grime, even worn down by their ordeal, she was beautiful. Chaska reached out with his good hand and gently touched her hair. Soft, real. She stirred, lifted her head, and her eyes went wide when she saw him looking at her. "You're awake," she grabbed his hand, and tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dirt. "Oh God, you're awake." The doctor said the bullet went through clean, missed the bone, but you'd lost so much blood, I thought I was so afraid. "How long?" His voice was rough, unused. 2 days. They've been keeping you sedated for the pain and to let your body heal. She was crying and smiling at the same time, clutching his hand like she might never let go. Colonel Mackenzie sent soldiers to the mine. They found... She paused, composing herself. Marshall Hart is dead, crushed in the collapse. 2 of his men died with him. 3 survived, but were badly injured. They've all been arrested, including Collins. They're talking, telling everything they know in exchange for lighter sentences. Pritchard. The name was bitter in his mouth. Arrested yesterday morning. The ledger was enough for an arrest warrant, and when they searched his offices and home, they found so much more evidence. Her voice broke. Ledgers showing years of bribes, false reports, forged documents, and... She paused, her fingers tightening on his. Records of the blanket shipment. He kept meticulous records, Chaska. Notes on how much he paid for infected blankets from the smallpox hospital, his profit margins when he sold them to the tribes, even notes about which villages he planned to target. It's all there in his own handwriting. It's all evidence now. Chaska closed his eyes, and for a moment he couldn't breathe around the tightness in his chest. Not quite relief, not quite satisfaction. Something more complicated and painful vindication mixed with the bitter knowledge that it came too late for his mother. Too late for his sister, too late for all the others who had died. Your mother and sister, Eliza said softly, as if reading his thoughts. They get justice now. Real justice. Justice not bring them back, he said, opening his eyes to look at her. Not undo the pain, not give me back lost years. No, she agreed. But it might prevent other families from suffering the same way. It means their deaths weren't meaningless. That has to count for something. Yes, he said after a moment. It count for something. Over the next 3 weeks, as Chaska healed slowly, Eliza rarely left his side, except when forced to by the nurses or by necessity. She told him everything about the investigation that was spreading like wildfire, touching corrupt officials across the territory. About how Collins had confessed to everything in a desperate bid for leniency, revealing the full scope of his father's criminal empire. About how the territorial governor himself had gotten involved, calling for a full audit of land claims and mining rights across the region. The trial took place in Denver, where the territorial judge held court in a grand stone building that spoke of civilization's attempt to impose order on chaos. Chaska insisted on attending despite his injury, his arm still in a sling, his shoulder protesting every movement. Eliza came with him, as did Colonel Mackenzie Ruth and several other survivors who had stories to tell. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, people standing in the aisles and pressed against the walls. Silas Pritchard sat at the defense table in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most of the observers made in a year. His lawyer sat beside him, both wearing expressions of confident disdain. But as the prosecution laid out their case, the ledger, the additional records seized from Pritchard's office's testimony, from families he had defrauded, medical records, and death certificates for the smallpox victims, that confidence began to crack and crumble. When it was Chaska's turn to testify, he stood and walked to the witness box, feeling every eye in the room on him. Most white people had never seen an Indian testify in a court of law. He was acutely, painfully aware of his braided hair, his beaded vest worn over a borrowed white shirt, the way he stood out like a single dark stone in a river of pale faces. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Wendell Gaines, with a reputation for righteousness, approached him with respect in his bearing. State your name for the record, please. Chaska, son of Tahatan of the Lakota people. And you knew the defendant, Silas Pritchard? Yes. He come to my village 5 years ago in winter. Sell us trade goods, blankets. Can you describe what happened after your family purchased these blankets? Chaska took a breath, steadying himself. My mother, her name was Winona, which mean firstborn daughter. She traded our best furs for 3 wool blankets. They were beautiful blankets, thick and warm, perfect for winter. She wrapped my sister and young brother in them that same night, so happy to keep them warm. Within 1 week, she falls sick. Fever, rash, pustules on her skin. His hands clenched into fists. She dies screaming, not recognize anyone, her body covered in sores. 2 other families in our village who buy Pritchard's blankets also die the same way. 8 people. 8 deaths he caused. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge hammered his gavel. Order, I will have order. Gaines held up the ledger, its pages marked with colored tabs. This is the defendant's personal account book seized from his office. There's an entry here dated January 1873. I'll read it for the court. Purchased 12 wool blankets from Mercy Hospital, Boston. Smallpox ward disposal condemned as foul with contagion and marked to be burned. Cost $2 per blanket. Resale value to tribes $15 per blanket. Excellent profit margin. Additional benefit, reduced native population may ease pressure on land claims. He looked up at the jury, his voice hard. The defendant knew exactly what he was selling, and he knew exactly what it would do. Pritchard's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. This is inflammatory. My client had no way of knowing those blankets were contaminated. Gaines pulled out another document. Then perhaps he can explain this letter, also found in his files from the hospital administrator, explicitly warning that the blankets carried smallpox and must be burned, not sold. A letter the defendant signed for upon receipt. The defense lawyer sat down slowly, face pale. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, the lawyer tried to rattle Chaska, asking why he should be believed, implying he was a savage who didn't understand civilized business practices, suggesting he was motivated by primitive revenge rather than justice. But Chaska remained calm, answering each question simply and directly, never losing his composure. When Eliza testified about the supply train attack, the document she'd found, and the attempts on her life, her voice shook at times. But she didn't back down. She described the fear, the desperation, the moment she thought she would die. And she described Chaska's courage in protecting her, his determination to see justice done not for personal gain, but because it was right. The most dramatic moment came when Gaines called Owen Collins to testify. Collins had been sitting in the gallery, shackled between two stone-faced deputies. As he walked to the stand, he looked like a man who had aged 10 years in as many weeks. The cocky confidence was gone, replaced by hollow-eyed shame. "Mr. Collins," Gaines said without preamble, "you are the illegitimate son of Silas Pritchard, correct?" "Yes." Collins said quietly, his voice barely audible. "Please speak up for the court." "Yes," Collins said louder with sudden vehemence. "Yes, I'm his bastard son, the dirty secret he's kept hidden for 23 years. Pritchard half rose from his chair, face flushing red. "You insolent!" The judge's gavel came down like a gunshot. "Mr. Pritchard, you will remain silent, or I will have you removed from your own trial." Gaines continued. "And your father sent you to infiltrate the survivors of the supply train attack and retrieve the incriminating ledger by any means necessary." "Yes. He found me 3 years ago. I didn't even know who my father was until then. My mother died when I was young, never told me his name. He showed up one day with proof, with a letter my mother had written. He said if I proved myself loyal, proved I was worthy, he would acknowledge me as his son. Give me a place in his business, make me legitimate." Colin's voice turned bitter. "I was such a fool. I betrayed good people who trusted me for the promise of a father's love, for a chance to belong somewhere. Why are you testifying against him now?" Collins looked directly at Pritchard, and there was such pain and rage in his eyes that several people in the gallery gasped. Because in that mine, when those charges went off and I thought I was going to die, I realized something. My father, he spat the word like a curse, had sent word to Sheriff Brand to eliminate all witnesses, no exceptions. That included me, his own son. I was just another loose end to be cut, another inconvenient problem to be buried. He pulled out a bundle of letters from inside his shirt. "These are letters proving he's known I was his son for 20 years, but never acknowledged me, never helped my mother when we were starving, never cared if I lived or died." And this, he pulled out a telegram. "This is his order to Brand, dated the day before the mine. It says, and I quote, 'No survivors. Collins has served his purpose. Dispose of him with the others.' My own father ordered my murder." He placed the papers on the judge's bench with shaking hands. "I don't expect forgiveness from anyone in this room. I don't deserve it. I betrayed people who showed me nothing but kindness. I helped hunt them like animals. But I want everyone to know the truth about Silas Pritchard. I want them to see what kind of man puts profit above human life, what kind of father orders his own son's death." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the judge seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, every face was grim. The foreman, a gray-haired rancher with weathered hands, stood and faced Pritchard directly. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of manslaughter in the deaths of Winona and 7 others from smallpox exposure, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the supply train attack, we find the defendant guilty. On all charges brought before this court, we find the defendant guilty. Pritchard surged to his feet, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. This is a travesty, a mockery. You can't convict a white man on the word of savages and bastards. I have rights, I have. The judge's gavel came down like thunder again and again. Mr. Pritchard, sit down this instant, or I will hold you in contempt and add to your sentence. 2 bailiffs forced Pritchard back into his seat. He was breathing hard, his expensive suit rumpled, his carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbling. The judge looked at him with cold eyes, with the kind of disgust usually reserved for things found crawling under rocks. Silas Pritchard, you have been found guilty on all counts. It is the judgment of this court that you be remanded to the territorial prison to serve 30 years at hard labor. Furthermore, all your assets, your land, your mining claims, your properties are to be liquidated immediately. The proceeds will be distributed as restitution to your victims' families. You will leave this courtroom with nothing but the sentence you have earned through your greed, your cruelty, and your complete disregard for human life. He paused, then turned to the gallery, his voice rising. Let it be known throughout this territory that the law applies to all men, equally regardless of wealth or influence. Justice may be slow, but it will not be denied. Then the judge did something unexpected. He looked directly at Chaska. Mr. Chaska, you have shown remarkable courage and integrity throughout this ordeal. You had every reason to abandon Miss Thornton to her fate, to walk away from dangers that were not your responsibility. Instead, you chose to help a stranger because it was the right thing to do. You sought justice through legal means rather than personal revenge, even though you had ample cause for the latter. This court and this territory owes you a debt of gratitude. I can only offer an apology that such gratitude comes so late. I apologize for the injustices you and your people have suffered at the hands of men like Pritchard. While we cannot undo the past, we can ensure that justice is served today, and we can work toward a future where such travesties are not tolerated. It was a small thing, that apology. It didn't bring back his mother or his sister. It didn't erase the years of pain, but it was something in acknowledgement, a moment of recognition that his life, his family's lives, mattered in the eyes of the law. Chaska felt his throat tighten with emotions he couldn't quite name. Outside the courthouse afterward, as the sun set and painted the Denver sky in shades of orange and purple, Eliza turned to Chaska. Around them, people were celebrating, discussing the verdict, but they stood in a quiet bubble of their own. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment, looking out at the city's bustling streets, at the mixture of hope and chaos that seemed to define this American frontier. "I go back to my people. Tell them about justice. Tell them that Pritchard paid for what he did. Show them that sometimes, even for us, law can work." He glanced at her. "And you still want to be teacher?" "Yes. Silver Creek has offered me a position. They're building a new school using some of the restitution money from Pritchard's assets. They want to name it after," her voice caught, "after your mother. Winona School, to honor her memory and all the others who died. Would that be acceptable?" Chaska felt something crack open in his chest. Yes, she would like that. She always say education was path forward, that children must learn both old ways and new ways to survive. Then I'll teach there. I'll make sure her name is remembered with respect. They stood in silence, and everything Chaska wanted to say seemed inadequate, too small for the enormity of what he felt. This woman had changed his life, had reminded him that life could be more than just survival and grief. She'd shown him that trust was possible, that connection was worth the risk of pain. That love, Eliza, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I must tell you something. In mine, when we face death, I realize. He struggled with the English, with finding words big enough for what he felt. I realize that you are most important thing to me. More than revenge, more than justice, you. If you die, if I lose you, it would be like losing Mika again, like losing my mother. I do not want to be in a world where you are not. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Chaska, I know you must go to Silver Creek. I know you have life, have purpose. I not ask you to give up this. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the small locket she'd given him that day, outside the courthouse, the one he'd carried close to his heart ever since. But I want you to know I love you. I love you in a way I never think I could love again after Mika die. You make me want to live, not just survive. You make me hope for future. She reached up and touched his face with trembling fingers, her palm warm against his cheek. You stubborn man. I've been in love with you since the moment you lifted that wagon off my leg. Since you looked at me like I was a person worth saving, not just a white woman to be left to her fate. Since you shared your pain with me and let me share mine with you. I don't want a life without you either. Then what we do? He asked, his hand covering hers against his face. You have teaching. I have my people. We live in different worlds. So we find a way to live in both, she said firmly. People will talk. Some will be cruel. Some will try to drive us apart. But we've survived worse, haven't we? We've survived Pritchard and Hart and a collapsing mine. Surely we can survive small-minded bigotry. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple. It'll be hard and complicated and messy. She smiled through her tears. But we stand firm, together, like we have been all along. He pulled her close, and for a long moment they simply held each other as the Denver street bustled around them, as the sun continued its descent, as the world kept turning. And in that embrace, Chaska felt something he hadn't felt in 5 long years, peace. They were married that summer, in a ceremony that blended both their traditions in ways that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. Some people in Silver Creek disapproved vocally. A white woman marrying an Indian was still scandalous, still seen by many as a betrayal of racial boundaries that were supposed to be inviolable. But Colonel Mackenzie attended in full-dress uniform, lending the weight of military respectability to the proceedings. Several families from the fort came as well, and Owen Collins was there released after serving 18 months of his sentence, now working to reform law enforcement practices and speaking publicly about his father's crimes. Ruth Hargreaves stood as Eliza's witness. During one of their rest stops on the journey to Fort Sterling, Ruth had finally shared her own story. How Pritchard had defrauded her husband in a mining deal, forging documents that made it appear her husband had embezzled from investors. Unable to prove his innocence, shamed and broken, Ruth's husband had taken his own life. Ruth had sworn then to see Pritchard pay for his crimes. Taking the ledger had been her first real chance at revenge and justice. Chaska's sister-in-law, the widow of his dead nephew, came to the wedding bringing several other members of his band. It was a gesture of acceptance, of recognition that Chaska's path, while different from theirs, was still worthy of respect. His sister-in-law embraced Eliza carefully, formally, and gave her a gift, a pair of moccasins she'd made decorated with the same pattern Mika had once favored. The restitution money from Pritchard's liquidated assets had been substantial. Chaska's share was enough to help his people buy better land quality tools, seed for crops. Some he kept enough to build a small but solid house near Silver Creek, carefully positioned so it could be with Eliza during the school year, while still maintaining his ties to his community. It was a compromise, a bridge between worlds. It wasn't always easy. There were people who spat when they passed, who whispered cruel things just loud enough to be heard. There were parents who pulled their children away from Eliza's classroom because she was squaw-married, who complained to the school board that she was corrupting their youth. But there were also allies' families who invited them to dinner, despite social pressure, children who loved Chaska's stories about tracking and hunting, who asked him to teach them about the stars and the seasons, people who judged them by their character rather than the color of their skin or the traditions they followed. 2 years later, on a cold November night, their daughter was born. They named her Mika Sarah, honoring both the sister Chaska had lost and the mother who had raised Eliza before typhoid took her. The baby had her mother's blue eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. On the day of her naming ceremony, a gathering attended by friends from both communities, Chaska wrapped little Mika in the elk-hide cloak his sister had made so many years ago. The beadwork gleamed in the autumn sunlight, each bead placed with love and care by hands that had been stilled too soon. He thought of all the pain, and that cloak represented his mother's agonizing death, his sister's grief-driven suicide, his own years of guilt and isolation. But he also thought of what had come after meeting Eliza, fighting for justice, learning to hope, again building a family that would honor those who had been lost. "Your aunt made this," he whispered to his daughter, who blinked up at him with unfocused baby eyes. She was brave and kind and strong. She loved with her whole heart, and when that heart broke, she could not find way to heal it. You carry her name. You carry her spirit. But you also make your own path. You be both Lakota and white. You be bridge between worlds like your parents try to be. And you always remember you are loved. So loved. Eliza stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears of joy tracking down her cheeks. Around them, their friends from both communities gathered to celebrate this new life, this symbol of hope and possibility. Years passed. The territory became a state. The wild places grew smaller as civilization expanded. But Chaska and Eliza's family grew stronger, more deeply rooted. Mika was joined by a son they named Tahatan, after Chaska's father, then another daughter they named Margarete, after Eliza's mother. The children grew up speaking both English and Lakota, learning their father's stories and their mother's books, equally comfortable in both worlds, even as those worlds continued to clash and overlap in complex ways. On Mika's 10th birthday, Chaska taught her to track deer the way his father had taught him, the way his father's father had taught before. That knowledge passed down through generations. She was patient and observant, exactly like her namesake aunt. "Papa," Mika asked as they rested beside a stream, their faces reflecting in the clear water. "Tell me about my aunt, the one I'm named for." So Chaska told her, the words coming easier now than they had years ago. About Mika's laughter that had sounded like bells. About her storytelling that could make children sit silent and spellbound for hours. About the intricate beadwork she'd created with such love and patience. About the pain she'd carried when their mother died, pain that had grown too heavy for her to bear. About the cloak that had become both monument and legacy, both burden and gift. "She sounds sad," young Mika said thoughtfully, running her fingers through the cool stream water. She was. Very sad. But before that, she was happy. She was full of joy and light. And she loved me very much, even though I did not see it clearly enough at the time. Just like I love you very much. Did she know that you loved her? The question hit him with familiar force, but the pain was softer now, worn smooth by time and healing. I hope so. I did not say it enough. I was too busy with my own anger, my own desire for revenge against Pritchard. I forgot to pay attention to the person right in front of me who needed me most. That is my great regret. Mika considered this seriously. Then she stood, walked over, and hugged him fiercely with all the strength of her 10-year-old arms. I know you love me, Papa. You tell me every day. You show me every day. You're here, and that's what matters. Chaska wrapped his arms around his daughter, his throat tight with emotion. Yes, I am here. And I will always tell you. Always show you. That is promise I make to both Mikas, to you, and to memory of my sister. It was a promise he kept. 30 years later, Chaska sat in the same spot by the stream, now gray-haired and weathered by 7 decades of life. The elk-hide cloak still draped over his shoulders, though it too showed its age, the leather worn thin in places, some beads missing edges frayed. But it was still beautiful, still precious. Beside him sat his eldest grandson, 8-year-old Tahatan, named after Chaska's father, in the way names circled through families like prayers. Grandfather. Tahatan said in Lakota Chaska had insisted all his grandchildren learn the language. Tell me the story of how you met grandmother. It was the story the children always asked for, the one that never got old, that took on the quality of legend with each retelling. So Chaska told it again in both Lakota and English, so the boy would understand both versions about the woman trapped under a wagon, about the desperate flight across the territory, about standing up to powerful men like Pritchard and Hart, about the mine collapse and the trial and justice finally imperfectly served. And then you got married. Tahatan asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear it anyway, the way children do with their favorite stories. And then we got married. Best decision of my life. But it must have been hard, Tahatan said thoughtfully with wisdom beyond his years. Being different from each other. People must have been mean. Yes. Sometimes they still are. Chaska touched the cloak. But you know what I learned, what your grandmother taught me. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing the right thing even when you are afraid. Your grandmother taught me that. And my sister, your great-aunt Mika, she taught me that love is worth holding on to even when it hurts to remember. Especially when it hurts to remember. Is that why you still wear her cloak? Yes. But also because it reminds me that the people we love never truly leave us. They live on in what they taught us and how they shaped us in the choices we make because of them. In you. He touched his grandson's face gently. You have her kindness. Your mother has her creativity. Your aunt has her way with stories. She is not gone. She is just transformed. Changed into something new, but still present. Tahatan touched the beadwork reverently, his small fingers tracing the patterns his great-great-aunt had made so long ago. I wish I could have met her. She lives in you, Chaska said. And in your mother and in every member of our family who tells stories, who creates beauty, who loves fiercely and completely. She is not gone. She is here in all of us, in everything we do that honors her memory. That night, lying beside Eliza in the house they had built together, the house that had sheltered their children and now sheltered their grandchildren during visits, Chaska thought about legacy. About the ripples one life creates spreading outward across decades and generations like circles from a stone thrown into still water. His mother and sister had died terribly unjustly, their deaths a crime that could never be fully answered or repaid. But from that tragedy had come a quest for justice that had changed lives, that had brought down a corrupt and murderous man, that had prevented other families from suffering the same fate. And from that quest had come love, unexpected, unlikely precious. Marriage, children, grandchildren. A family that bridged 2 worlds and made both richer for the bridging. It was not the legacy his mother and sister had planned or hoped for, but Chaska believed they would be proud of it anyway. Proud that he had taken his pain and transformed it into purpose. That he had chosen life over bitterness, hope over despair. That he had loved and been loved despite all the reasons the world gave him to close his heart. "What are you thinking about?" Eliza asked sleepily, her hand finding his in the darkness, their fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of decades. "About circles," he said. "How what seems like an ending is sometimes a beginning. How the worst moments can lead to the best ones if we are brave enough to keep walking forward." "That's very philosophical for bedtime." She teased gently, her voice warm with affection. "I am old. Old men are allowed to be philosophical." "You're not that old," she said, as she had said countless times before. "I am 71. That is ancient." "You're distinguished," she corrected her standard response. "There's a difference." He laughed, the sound soft in the darkness, and pulled her closer. After 50 years together, her body still fit perfectly against his, and the way puzzle pieces fit or rivers fit their banks inevitably, naturally right. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around them, and the wind in the cottonwoods outside, the distant call of an owl hunting in the night. Then Chaska said quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" Eliza asked, though she'd asked this question many times before too, and knew what he would say. "For screaming that day in the canyon. For being brave enough to accept help from a stranger who looked different from you. For seeing me as a person, not just an Indian. For loving me. For our life. For our children and grandchildren. For 50 years of standing firm together. For everything." Eliza propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight that filtered through their window. After 50 years, he could still make out the beauty in her face. Could still see the young woman who had been trapped under a wagon and had trusted him to save her. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping when you heard me scream. For protecting me when you had every reason to walk away. For teaching me that courage comes in many forms. For building this life with me. For being the best husband and father and grandfather I could have imagined. For being you." They settled back into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, wrapped in the warmth of a love that had been tested and proven and strengthened by time. And somewhere nearby, hanging on its peg, the elk-hide cloak kept its silent vigil, a constant presence, a faithful guardian, a bridge between past and present and future. Chaska's sister's gift had protected him in ways she never could have foreseen when she'd bent over it by firelight, placing each bead with care and love. It had kept her memory alive through the darkest years. It had been there when he met Eliza, when he fought for justice, when he built his family. And it would be there when he passed it on to his children, another link in the chain of love and memory, that connected past to future, the dead, to the living, pain to healing. Mika had died believing she was alone, believing the pain would never end, unable to see past the darkness that consumed her. But she had been wrong. Her love had continued, expressed through the cloak she'd made, through the brothers she'd protected, through the family that came after, through all the small acts of kindness and courage that rippled outward from her life, like light from a stone thrown into dark water. She lived on. Not in the way she'd hoped, perhaps not in her own continued breath and heartbeat, but in a way that mattered just as much, maybe more. In the stories told about her. In the beadwork patterns her grandnieces learned. In the gentleness her nephew showed his children. In the name carried forward by a bright-eyed girl who would never know her, but carried her spirit nevertheless. "Sleep well, sister," Chaska whispered into the darkness, as he had whispered countless times before. Your brother is happy. Your sacrifice was not meaningless. You can rest now. You can be at peace. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and pine and the rich earth of late summer. In the distance, a coyote sang to the moon, its voice echoing across the land that had witnessed so much pain and joy, so much loss and love, so much death and stubborn, resilient life. The story was not over. Stories never really end. They just transform, change, shape, flow into new stories, the way rivers flow into seas. But this chapter, this particular thread in the great tapestry, had found its peace, had reached its resolution, had earned its rest. And that Chaska thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered. It was everything that endured. It was everything that made the pain worthwhile. It was love.